Anyway, it's been overdone. But basically, let's try to have like a real understanding, a true, authentic understanding of what the whole fasting thing is. Because as soon as we start seeing it as an obligation, it takes away from the depth and it takes away from what it should be. Like anything, right? When someone loves sports, okay? But if I tell you you're obligated to practice between 3 and 5 a.m. every day, chances are you might lose interest in this sport. So as soon as something becomes an obligation, it becomes a drag, it becomes something that I'm just not into, then I don't do it willingly. Okay? So just for the sake of being all on the same page, what do we know, or what do you want to share about fasting? I know this is a very generic, very mundane way of beginning a discussion, but let's just do it for the sake of everybody sort of getting different perspectives in. Just toss things out. There's no wrong answer.
Is there like a question?
Yeah, what is fasting?
What is fasting?
What do you know about fasting? Yeah, it's a question. Question mark. What do you know about fasting? Yes.
It's just refraining from instant gratification. It doesn't even necessarily have to be just food. It could just be anything. Really.
Yes. That's a good answer. What else?
That was my answer.
Word for word.
Yeah.
I agree. Any other thoughts? No? All right. Well, we'll jump into it. So basically, fasting is a gift. It's a gift because once I use it properly, it changes everything about me, right? To fast means to transform. To fast means to take out something that I find in myself that is not okay, and to turn it into something that is edifying or something that is good, something that adds goodness, right? And I'll start off, I'm going to be throwing a bunch of Bible verses and quotes at you, and the whole point of this is to give you perspective of what different fathers or what different writers in the Bible say about fasting or any other component that relates to fasting. So James says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him." So part of fasting is to endure temptation. Temptation is a big part of fasting because nobody lives in this world without being tempted. If you have a physical body, you're being tempted in some shape or form. If it's not food, it could be power, right? It could be knowledge. You could be tempted by anything that appeals to you. But it's not that being tempted is wrong. It's how we react or how we take temptation and how we handle it. Okay? That's the difference. Also in James, we read, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." So, what is sin? What is sin described as? As us being both spiritual and earthly beings, for us, what is sin? Yes?
Transgression of the law.
Yes? Yes?
Do you want me to get more specific?
Give me a more intimate answer. Intimate in terms of our relationship to God.
Okay. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12.
Yes.
Luke chapter 6, verse 31. Do unto others as you would want done unto you. And then if you look at Matthew chapter 25, it goes on this whole spiel about the same way the evil that you've done unto others, it's the same that you've done to me. Because God is omnipotent, so therefore he feels what everyone else feels.
Okay, to summarize, is disconnect from God. Okay? Basically, exactly that. But basically, all of that encompasses what it means to be like God or to be in union with God. Right? Sin is death. Right? Sin is disconnect. Sin is being estranged from God because sin is enmity, is always enmity with God. basically, when we've taken on a different form other than that which is perfect in the image and likeness of God, we've taken away from what it means to be holy, or basically what it means to be disconnected from God. And all of this, you'll connect it. And again, it's going to seem like it's a very sporadic kind of topic where there's different things coming at you from different ways. But in all of this, always think what fasting is. So while we're eating, and I know there's food here, it does not mean that we should not be eating while we're talking about fasting, because fasting is very deep. It's a very deep definition, and it's not just associated with food, right? Constantly reading the ingredients of a box, right, is not fasting. It's just called reading, okay? So, gluttony, everybody knows what gluttony is? Yes? So gluttony makes a man gloomy and fearful, but fasting makes him joyful and courageous. And as gluttony calls forth greater and greater gluttony, so fasting stimulates greater and greater endurance. When a man realizes the grace that comes through fasting, he desires to fast more and more. And the graces that come through fasting are countless. So that's what happens when we choose to fast and versus choosing to eat, right? So eating brings upon us a stronger and a more intense desire to continue to eat, right? Because I'm giving way to the stomach. And the stomach is as tangible and as physical as it gets, because it's an instant gratification, right? As opposed to a delayed gratification, it's an instant gratification. Anything that is physical and provides us an instant gratification and that rush is something that is always going to attract us and tie us into what it offers. So as soon as we tie ourselves to something, it continues to pull us in. And fasting has the same impact, except fasting is more challenging because it's something that is, to us, abnormal. The body is used to being fed constantly through the mouth, through the mind, through anything that is physical, whether it's phones or laptops or whatever it is. It stimulates the mind. It stimulates my interest. It keeps me going, right? When I bounce between different social media, it keeps me entertained. If there's something that's not on Instagram, it could be on Facebook, right? Even though Facebook is basically outdated now, is it? Or I don't know if people use it. But basically, when we bounce around between these different apps or these different social media websites, we provide ourselves with a different kind of stimulation that I don't find in reading a book, for example. Okay? So this is why fasting is now abnormal to us. Fasting has become a challenge, right? Also associated with all of this is things that we're not used to doing. If I'm not used to giving something to someone without thinking about it, it's abnormal. Okay? So that in itself is a way of understanding what fasting is. If Fadi one day calls me and says, hey man, I need help moving a box in my house. Okay? A box. And then I start questioning him. Oh, you can't lift the box on your own. Is there somebody nearby that can help you lift the box? So I'm not used to automatically saying, yes, I'll come and help you. Right? My instinct or my reaction is to find a way for me not to be there. So to find a solution for someone else to be there, or for Fadi to do the lifting of the box on his own without me having to go out of my comfort zone to go there. Okay? Fasting is being able to go against what I'm used to. So a different way to sort of quote unquote fast in this situation, or to see it in a more edifying way, is to say, yes, I'm coming, right? So to take that 20, 30 minutes, go move the box, and then to go back to whatever it is that I was doing. So unless we're able to step outside of this comfort zone, fasting is useless, absolutely useless. Because then it becomes just stopping certain dietary, or having certain dietary restrictions during specific months during the year, but after that I go back to exactly who I was. Okay? So lead us not into temptation. Again, now here we're talking about a whole idea of temptation. So lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. We say it every single day when we pray the Our Father. Is God asked to deliver his children from evil by preserving them from temptation, or by preserving them in temptation? So as human beings, when we pray to God, are we saying, God, pull me out of this situation? Is God supposed to be there to bail us out, or to strengthen us during the temptation? Right? You can argue both. It could be both, right? When there's something that is intense, a temptation that is intense, it's okay to flee from temptation. It's okay to walk in the other direction. But at the same time, when I'm in the temptation, to ask for God's power, God's grace, right, is showing trust in God. As believers, we know that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and is all-powerful. So no matter what the situation, He is able to guide me through it or take me out of it. Okay? But for the most part, we always say that when I'm in a situation, God doesn't put me in a situation that I cannot handle. Okay? He gives us everything according to our abilities. Any comments or questions so far? Yes.
Yeah, I disagree, actually.
Sure.
I think God definitely gives us things that we cannot handle to show just how powerless we are, and I think Romans 9 is a testament.
Just like, yeah, I can create it, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
But I disagree. Kevin?
No, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. I think it shows that we're doing our research, right? Being able to have different perspectives shows that we're doing our research and we're actually being proactive. But I think it's finding what's edifying for us and understanding the importance of basically what fasting is, and if it's actually edifying my understanding of how God works in our lives. Okay. So basically, two simple or common things that we are sometimes tempted to hold on to is our food and our money, right? As students, we try to hold on to as much food as we can, and we're hesitant to give it away. If someone says, can I have like a box of cereal, or can I have this, right? We're always hesitant to just give it freely without saying, oh, I can put some in a Ziploc bag for you and then I can give it to you, right? But we're always hesitant. We're always trying to figure out how I can keep as much of this as I can for myself, right? As much money as I can and as much food as I can, right? So what if the challenge becomes to give without trying to calculate exactly how much is left over for me? Obviously, with money, we have to be smart because we're students. But I mean, if someone asks for $5, right? Is it the end of the world if I give $5 to somebody? If someone says, I don't have $5 to buy food for today, right? Do I start questioning them? And do I start saying, oh, the other day you bought food for $15, right? Why is it that you're asking me for $5 today? So as soon as we make ourselves judges, is when we make everybody around us criminals, right? We're not meant to be judges. In its most logical sense, right? We don't know everybody's circumstance. We don't know what people go through. People have lives that we will never understand, right? Very volatile. So to make ourselves judges, to make ourselves capable of evaluating and assessing their lives and giving them what is suitable for them, right, takes away from the actual depth and the importance of being able to give with love. To add to that, if someone, for example, asks for something and then I give it to them, but they could see the reluctance, they could see, they could see me being unimpressed by giving them something, right? That takes away from the act of giving, right? If someone asks for something, I give freely and I give with love. And I encourage them, right? And I say, yes, I'm glad to give you this. You can always ask me for something else. Again, keep in mind the whole idea that we're talking about in terms of fasting and how it's supposed to transform me. Right? So before, when I gave something and I asked, what are you going to use this for? Now I don't even ask. It's none of my business to ask, actually. When someone reaches out because of a time of desperation, clearly the person is going through something and the person is broken. Right? So who am I to question the person in their time of brokenness and make them feel even more inadequate instead of giving freely and giving as Christ gave his life for us? Again, tie all of this into the depth that exists in fasting. And it creates this greater understanding of what it means to actually live it practically and for its purpose. Okay? Again, if we make ourselves judges, we've made those who are in need criminals. We need to learn how to give freely without reservation. If we're judges and we see ourselves as being adequate of making or analyzing people's lives and determining what they need and what they don't need, right? We've made them criminals. We've said, oh, I don't think you're right. I don't think you need $5. $2 is enough for you, right? So as soon as we start judging their lives and their situation and giving them what we think is okay, we've taken away from what it means to give freely as Christ has given us freely. When we see this, when we see the cross, okay, typically we understand what the cross means. We understand what it means for Christ to die on the cross for our sins. But if we put ourselves in the concept or in the idea or in the minds of the people that were living during Christ's time, when they walk by all of these wooden crosses and people are nailed to them, is that something that is glamorous? No, it was shameful. To be on the cross, it was shame. It was criminals. Criminals were put on the cross. So basically you saw a criminal on the cross and you walked by and you judged the person and you said, oh, this person probably killed. Or this person probably did something, I don't know, he probably stole something, I don't know. Right? So you would judge them, right? Just as someone who's on death row nowadays, we would think, oh, this person did something really bad. But who are we to say, right? Because the cross in itself is beautiful because it is what freedom is. If Christ did not die on the cross, then we are not free. We're not free from sin. We're not free from the bondage of sin. Right? Sin is basically what salvation is. The cross. The cross is what salvation is. Right? Without the cross, we have no Christianity. If you want to really validate our understanding of what it means to be Christian, take away the cross. Right? Is it the same result? Can we call ourselves Christians without the cross? Okay? So basically all of this is we don't look at each other and we judge based on appearance. Because if we looked at the cross, right, we would see that we would assume this is a sinful man and there's nothing beautiful about this. Any comments or questions so far? Fasting is effective when we act immediately. So one of the challenges that we all encounter when we fast is that we always have this desire to delay something, right? I'm going to go donate some money, but I'll do it next week. Or I'm going to donate some money when I get my first paycheck. I'm going to donate some money when my parents give me wire money into my account. So that becomes a trap because most likely that will not happen. That act that I keep delaying won't happen. But the key is for it to happen immediately. An example is Abraham, right? So Abraham's obedience was so profound because when God said, I need you to sacrifice your son for me, what did he do? First thing in the morning is he got up early in the morning and he got the donkey ready and he got the wood ready and he got everything ready and he didn't delay, right? So this is him about to take his son to be sacrificed. So if he had delayed that process, then maybe he wouldn't have actually taken his son, put him on the donkey, and taken him up to be sacrificed. So as soon as we delay or we try to make an excuse for ourselves to do something, to change something, is when it becomes a bit of a risk in terms of actually changing something. So our biggest mistake is that we delay. We put things off and don't act on what fasting should be. Right? So again, fasting is something where it teaches us to act immediately. If I tell myself, I'm not going to eat Oreos because I've already had like 7. Okay? The best thing is to either hide them, right? Or to walk away from the table, right? But to stand in front of the table and to constantly look at the Oreos is not going to help my situation, right? A popular example is Adam and Eve. When Eve was looking at the fruit, if Eve had walked away, who knows? Maybe she wouldn't have had the fruit. Again, this is not something we're going to analyze or dissect, but basically, when we linger and when we think too much about wanting to do something, it becomes more difficult. But to do it immediately and not to let that sort of become a struggle in my mind is actually more effective. So, shifting gears a little bit now, sticking to the whole idea of being abnormal when it comes to the idea or to the depth of fasting is to be able to make excuses for one another. A lot of times we expose one another. We'll say, oh, so-and-so, bought this the other day and they don't even use it. Why did they even buy it? Or so-and-so failed this class. I told them to study. I can't believe, they failed. I'm not going to be able to help them because they don't listen to me, right? Rather than exposing one another, we cover each other's faults, right? It's to be abnormal when my normal is not something that is good or pleasing to God. So love protects and covers the sins of others and never exposes them. There's a famous story, or a famous, one of the fathers, St. Macarius, the fathers of monasticism. There was a time when he was at the monastery and one of the novices was basically still new at the monastery, and he fell into the sin of bringing a prostitute in his cell, and he had his way with the prostitute, right? So, and then the other monks heard about this, and then they started saying, oh, let's go call Abba, St. Macarius, and let's get him to come so we can judge this person and have him kicked out of the monastery. St. Macarius at the time was known to be a spirit bearer, so he knew what was happening before they actually came to him. So he ran to the monk's cell, right? And then he took the woman, hid her under a basket, and he sat on the basket. Then the monks that were trying to come and have this person exposed came, and they couldn't find her in the cell. So they said, St. Macarius, this person committed this sin. We need to find this woman so that we can expose him and have him kicked out of the monastery. St. Macarius said, okay, look for her. Where is she? Try to find her in the cell. And they couldn't find her because she was under the basket sitting or hiding while St. Macarius was sitting on the basket. So they didn't find her, and then finally they left. And instead of St. Macarius judging him or saying anything that makes him feel useless or inadequate, he said, don't do this again. And he left. Okay? So this is the attitude of love. This is what it means to be Christ-like. And this is the depth of fasting, right? To be able to transform the way that we do things, and to be able to look beyond what people do and look beyond weaknesses, because we ourselves have weaknesses. Ecclesiastes, we were just talking about Ecclesiastes, says something is really powerful written here where we read, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. right? Again, we're going to shift gears a little bit more. Again, see this as a puzzle. Everything that we talk about, see it as a puzzle and how it connects to the grand picture of what the depth of fasting is. Apart from not eating milk and chicken, right? Think of it, again, from a very deep standpoint, because all of it comes to form what it means to be like Christ. I'll give you an example. There was one bishop once that was speaking, and he was saying how he visited a couple, an old couple. They're like in their late 70s. They're both sitting on chairs next to each other, and they're both crying. And then he asked them, why are you guys crying? They're depressed, and they realize, they're old, and they've lived lives that they weren't happy about. So they look back, and then they think to themselves, we pursued status, or we pursued money, or whatever the case is, right? And now they're nearing death, and they realize that they can't change the wrong decisions or the wrong things that they did. For example, the people that they wronged, they can't go back and fix that anymore, because those people are dead, for example, right? So it's better to remember God during the days of our youth, so that we don't regret it later on. To live a holy life now is to remember holiness continuously throughout our lives. To be like Christ now makes it easier to continue to live like Christ later on in our old age, right? We don't forget God. If we've experienced God, if we know what it means, right, to live a godly life, that's not something you forget. So basically, the life that we cultivate for ourselves, or the lives that we live now, is how we're going to live eternally. If I'm okay with living a life in terms of living hell now, basically that's the life I've cultivated for myself eternally. If I live in misery now, which is basically hell, then I'm okay with living in this state eternally. So try to compare a time when we were very, very joyous and we feel very happy versus for a time when we feel miserable and we feel like we're hopeless, right? This is basically a life basically a life of hell and a life of paradise, or a life of heaven. And that's what sticks with us. So whatever we choose, that's the life that we live eternally. And a life with Christ is a life of a deep and a true joy, which is a life that we have been called to live. Because that is, this is the epitome of humanity, is to live with Christ. So again, taking the first step is always difficult. Again, we gave the example of Abraham. Another example that we'll sort of try to remember is Zacchaeus. Right? Remember Zacchaeus, the short guy who wanted to see Christ? He was a tax collector, right? But he couldn't see him because there was a crowd. So Christ was with a bunch of people, and he tried to see him, but he couldn't. But what did he do? He climbed a tree. So he did what he could to be able to see Christ. Even though he didn't think much of it, he climbed the tree, and what did Christ do? Christ left the crowd and then walked up to him and said, I'm going to have dinner with you today. Come down from the tree. So when we try to do what we can with what we have, Christ will say, I'm gonna come stay with you. Or I'm always going to stay with you because you've taken initiative. You've taken a step in your time of need or in your time of difficulty. And to me, that means the world, right? So again, there's different things that we might not think much of, but it means a lot to our God. Any comments or questions? We have 8 slides left.
At the end,
At the end?
if there's time. If not,
Sounds good.
go ahead.
Don't forget your question.
I'll warn.
This saint says, if you strive after prayer, prepare yourself for diabolical suggestions and bear patiently their onslaughts, for they will attack you like wild beasts. Try as much as possible to be humble and courageous. He who endures will be granted great joy. So to be able to endure results in great joy. the hardest part about enduring is seeing the result after the struggle. So while we're in the middle of the struggle itself, or the temptation itself, for example, it's hard to see what comes after. It's easy to get stuck on what it is now, and hard to see the benefit or the fruit that comes after. So that's why we're told enduring is a great virtue to have, because it keeps me from giving in to the temptation or giving in to something that is not edifying. Again, think of fasting as this whole deep idea that is extremely practical. The scariest thing that we can do with fasting is to keep it as an ideology. If we keep it something that is theoretical and something that is a nice idea, it never becomes practical. But in itself, fasting is extremely practical. It leads to different things. It transforms me, and it brings me to understanding what it means to be like Christ. A little flow chart for you. First of all, we need to learn how to endure and not to hate others. If we can't handle each other's words and to forgive them, how will we handle persecution? You know how sometimes we tell ourselves, I'm ready to die for Christ, right? Or I could be in the middle of a prayer and I'm excited, or I'm at a convention. Oh, this is a great example. We're at a convention and we're hearing the speaker and it's amazing, and I'm telling myself, I'm ready to die for Christ, right? If someone tells me tomorrow, are you willing to die for Jesus Christ? I would say in a heartbeat, yes. Right? But 10 minutes later, when I'm arguing with a brother or a sister or a friend or a mother or a father or whatever the case is, right? I can't handle them. And I tell myself, I can't deal with this, and I walk away from the situation, or I make the situation worse by saying words that I can't take back, right? All of this stuff. If we can't endure this, if we can't forgive, then how are we going to say, yes, I'm ready to take a bullet for Christ? Okay, so it starts with being able to forgive one another and to love one another. Yes?
2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7 talks about, doing things for God with a cheerful heart. So, I guess when people do certain deeds, sometimes it's like, well, I know with my mind that this is the right thing to do, so they do it. But in their heart, they don't actually feel that way. So when it comes to forgiveness, I find there's like two different forms. There's one where the person just forgives because they know that's the right thing to do, but they don't actually want to inside. They're just, it's the right thing to do, and you can kind of sense it. Whereas there's another form of forgiveness that is very rare, where the person actually has like a warm heart towards the enemy. But I find the forgiveness of like, I'm just going to restrain, and I don't actually like you from the heart, but I'm just doing this just kind of out of self-interest and self-preservation to save myself from curses. So you might as well commit revenge. I mean, I don't know. I'm speaking as a carnal sinner, but
It's a tricky one. Revenge is never a pleasant path to go down, but
piece of clay, right?
I understand what you mean. But obviously one is more favored over the other, but there's nothing wrong with walking away as well. If to keep things from escalating and to become, more harmful for both parties. We're not called, to be best friends with everybody. We're not called to basically, force myself to be friends with someone.
So fake love, basically.
I wouldn't call it fake love.
Oh no, that's what I call it.
I think it's having boundaries. Like there's boundaries that are needed in certain situations to keep the relationship from being toxic. But to love means to love because they are a creation, of God, because we are brothers and sisters in Christ. If truly I believe that I am the son of God or the daughter of God, if I truly believe that we're all children
That's
of
the
God.
mind. That's the mind, though. There's the mind and there's the heart. Sometimes the mind and the heart aren't congruent with one another. In many cases,
It's tricky to have them aligned, right?
because you got the logic down, but if like the heart isn't there, it's like one part of the body's missing. You know?
Humanity.
James 2:10.
What do you have comments on this? Yes, Nardine.
Maybe that's when God's grace takes place, like, that's when He's gonna make us love others, even though we can't.
Yeah. The grace of God is something that we can't explain, right? So when the grace of God comes upon a certain situation and He strengthens me in a way that I cannot understand, right? That's the beauty of having faith in God, is that I know that no matter how difficult it is, that I know that He's able to provide something, to provide me with anything, to be able to get me through the confrontation or the struggle. So yeah, 100%. The grace of God is a big part of our lives. So the last part of this flowchart is, if we're trying to change something in our lives, something needs to change. We cannot keep doing the same thing and expect different results. I think everybody's familiar with what Einstein said. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if we want to change something, right? If I want to keep myself from judging somebody, there's something in my life that has to change. There needs to be change. Something has to be transformed. I cannot tell myself, 6 years from now, I know that I'm not going to be judging anybody, right? I'm only fooling myself. So change needs to happen immediately. Change needs to be effective immediately, so that so that a different path or a different result becomes evident in my life. Anthony Bloom says, God is always real, always Himself, and if we could stand face to face with Him as He is and perceive His objective reality, things might be simpler. But we manage in a subjective way to blur this truth, this reality in front of which we stand, and to replace the real God by a pale picture of Him. Even worse, by a God who is unreal because of our one-sided and poor conception of Him. So our God is a real God. Our God knows that we sin. Our God knows that we have weakness because of the flesh. So He's not going to be unrealistic in terms of what He expects of me. All He asks is that I live a life of goodness and a life that is directed towards loving Him. Right? If I learn how to love God, then everything else falls into place. In terms of loving one another, in terms of serving one another, giving without asking what the money is for, giving without asking what the food is for, helping somebody move a box without asking how heavy is the box, how far are you moving the box, right? So to have this kind of love for God, right, is a life-changing thing that transforms us in a way that cannot be understood, but only experienced. Right? Academic scholars talk about mysticism a lot. Mysticism is the whole idea of experiencing that which is intangible and that is which is mystical, associated to a supernatural power that basically has an omniscient or omnipotent side that humanity does not understand. Right? So mysticism is understood to be experienced and not fully or not understood. Because if we could, as human beings, understand what mysticism is, then we wouldn't need God. If I truly understood how the world, the universe was created, right, then I could create the universe. Right? So I am in no position, again, to be looking at people's situations and to judge or to do um, things that bring distress or things that bring someone else to think of themselves as being less than perfect. Because again, we're all made perfect. We're all made beautiful in Christ. So the moment when we discover God within the situation and that all things are God's and everything is of God, then we begin to enter this divine kingdom and acquire freedom. So I'll ask you this question. This is not a hypothetical question. I actually would hope for someone to answer. What does it mean to be free? It's a big question, but what does it mean to be free? How would you answer it in a very short sentence? Yes.
To no longer be enslaved to your broken natural state that you're born into.
That's a great answer.
I take no responsibility for it.
So freedom, as human beings, when we were created free, right? And obviously, when sin entered into the world, we became bonded. We became bonded, or we became enslaved to the world. But true freedom in itself is only given back to us through Christ. Right? When the Word incarnate became crucified on the cross, He took the sins of the world and crucified the sins of the world and resurrected us back with Him into the kingdom of heaven. So if ever we think that we are free without Christ, it's only something that we are thinking because we are deceiving ourselves. It's a deceiving way to think in terms of living without Christ. If we think that we're happy, right? Because later on we'll realize that we're actually living in hell. Again, this is something that we could talk about for days, but again, experiencing Christ allows us to realize what it means to live in hell and to live a heavenly life. 4 slides, I promise. Man is only a true man when he's completely united with God, and in everything and in every way completely lives in God, thinks in God, feels in God, acts in God, is virtuous in God, is immortal in God, is eternal in God. Only and solely in God is a man, a true man, a perfect man, a man in whom all the fullness of the Godhead lives. So, to summarize this in one word, or in 2 words, 3 words, unity with God. Right? So, to understand what it means to be unified with God is to understand what it means to be human. Right? Because humanity will always fall short of being perfect. Humanity will never be able to achieve perfection without God. Okay? Sorry, there was a note here I made for myself. There was an example that was presented by a monastic. He goes to his Abba and he says, Abba, I have a tiger and I have a lion inside of me. Which one will win? And he says, the one that you feed the most. Right? So basically, if we feed our spiritual lives more than our physical lives, that will prevail. So we become living more spiritual lives rather than the physical. So again, tie this to the whole understanding and the whole concept of what it means to fast. What am I feeding? I'm going to skip that. Faith tested. So I'll read this very quickly. I know I'm taking quite a long time, but pray to the Lord for wisdom, discernment, and strength to resist temptation. Our flesh is weak, but why would we let our weak flesh rule over our soul? Prayer enables the soul to rule over the body so that we do not become driven by instinct. Rather, we are filled with and guided by the Spirit of God, who does not lead us into temptation. So, along with being able to cut out things that are non-edifying during the period of fast, or ideally every day of my life, is to incorporate prayer. Prayer is such a real and practical thing that, again, it's easy for it to become an ideology and not necessarily something that is in the doing or something that I practice. As soon as we enter into a life of prayer, we realize the blessings that come from it. And then when we ask for something from God, He gives it to us, even though it's not direct. Sometimes it can come in different shapes and forms. For example, if I pray for patience, and then half an hour later, I deal with a very difficult person, do I yell at God and say, why would you do this to me? Or do I say, thank you? So how is it that I want to learn patience? What is my idea of learning patience? Right? It's not always according to how I see it, but how God sees it and how He teaches me what patience is. Yes.
So like in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, an evil that leads to good, essentially. Breaking outside of black and white thinking. So it might seem like this is a wrongdoing, but it's an experience that will, allow good to come.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's to assume that we are omniscient and that we are all-knowing is very misguiding, right? Because we're not all-knowing. So if a situation of patience presents itself, I am told or I am asked to endure. Because if I endure and I come out victorious from that, it means I've gained something. Right? Sam, did you have a question?
I did not.
Okay.
Apologize.
It's okay. Again, talking about giving and being able to give without reservation, give without questioning, and to give because someone is in need. Basically, I'll link it to this because this is such an important passage from the Gospel of Matthew when he writes, "Then he will also say to those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not take me in, naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me.' Then they will also answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?' Then he will answer them, saying, 'Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.'" So, again, in its simplest form, as soon as I make myself a judge and I say this person is not worthy of my time, this person is not worthy of my $5 that they asked me for, this person is not worthy of me visiting them because they're not even that sick, or they have a cold, everybody has a cold, I'm not going to visit this person. It takes away from what it means to actually give to Christ and what it means to actually love without any conditions. Again, fasting is supposed to be incorporated into every fiber of our lives, and not just in terms of what is written on the box of food that we eat. Finally, we'll conclude with this slide. The beloved writes, "I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one, that they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world." Like we said before, in the time of temptation, in the face of adversity, we pray for strength. We pray for our God to strengthen us and to give us the grace that is necessary for us to endure and to come out victorious, so that we could see His glory, and that we can offer Him thanks in everything that we do, especially during the blessed times of fasting, and that we may become one with Him as always in everything that we do. To our God be the glory for it.